Good evening, friends and fiends, dear witches and warlocks and ghostly kings and queens. Welcome back to the spooky side of A Bit Late. It's me, but Frank, and I've still got that mulled cider candle burning, which hopefully will keep the spirits at bay long enough for this evening's tale. Tonight we are continuing the ghostly, ghastly legend of Sleepy Hollow. And if you're hungry, I suggest getting something to eat because this tale gets really descriptive about food, just as it does about the environment and setting. Last we read, we learned of Sleepy Hollow's supernatural past and met Ichabod Crane, a lanky, superstitious schoolteacher with an intensely active imagination who gets really chummy with the ladies of the area. We also met his greatest fear, and no, it's not a ghost or ghoul or witch, but, quote, ripe and melting and rosy-cheeked as one of her father's peaches, 18-year-old Katrina Van Tassel. Yep. So light some candles, curl up with a blanket, and follow my voice into Sleepy Hollow. Old Balthus Van Tassel was a perfect picture of a thriving, contented, liberal-hearted farmer. He seldom, it is true, sent either his eyes or his thoughts beyond the boundaries of his own farm, but within those everything was snug, happy, and well-conditioned. He was satisfied with his wealth, but not proud of it, and piqued himself upon the hearty abundance rather than the style in which he lived. His stronghold was situated on the banks of the Hudson in one of those green, sheltered, fertile nooks in which the Dutch farmers are so fond of nestling. A great elm spread its broad branches over, at the foot of which bubbled up a spring of the softest and sweetest water. Delicious. In a little well formed of a barrel, and then stole sparkling away through the grass to a neighboring brook that babbled along the adders and dwarf willows. Hard by the farmhouse was a vast barn that might have served for a church, every window and crevice of which seemed bursting forth with treasures of the farm. The flail was busily resounding within it from morning to night, swallows and martins skimmed twittering among the eaves, and rows of pigeons, some with one eye turned up, as if watching the weather, some with their heads under their wings or buried in their bosoms, and others swelling and cooing and bowing about their dames, were enjoying the sunshine on the roof. Oh, this sounds so peaceful. Sleek, unwieldy porkers were grunting in the repose and abundance of their pens, from whence sailed forth, now and then, troops of suckling pigs, as if to snuff the air. There's a lot going on this farm. A stately squadron of snowy geese were riding in an adjoining pond, convoying whole fleets of ducks. Regiments of turkeys were gobbling through the farmyard, and guinea fowls fretting about it like ill-tempered housewives with their peevish, discontented cry. Hey now. Before the barn door strutted the gallant cock, that pattern of a husband, a warrior, and fine gentleman, clapping his burnished wings and crowing in the pride and gladness of his heart, sometimes tearing up the earth with his feet, and then generously calling his ever-hungry family of wives and children to enjoy the rich morsel which he had discovered. The pedagogue's mouth watered as he looked upon this sumptuous promise of a luxurious winter fare. Oh no, all those birds, our dinner. In his devouring mind's eye, he pictured to himself every roasting pig running about with a pudding in his belly and an apple in his mouth. The pigeons were snugly put to bed in a comfortable pie and tucked in with a coverlet of crust. The geese were swimming in their own gravy. Oh my God, this is worse than any spooky thing. And the ducks pairing cozily in dishes like snug married couples with the decent competency of onion sauce. This is so bad. In the porkers he saw carved out the future sleek side of bacon and juicy relishing ham. Not a turkey, but he beheld daintily trussed up with its gizzard under its wing, and peradventure a necklace of savory sausages. Oh man, I'm sorry if you're a vegetarian or vegan. This is really descriptive. And even bright Chanticleer himself lay sprawling on his back in a side dish with uplifted claws, as if craving that quarter which his chivalrous spirit disdained to ask while living. He's talking about the rooster there. Yikes. As the enraptured Ichabod fancied all this, oh Ichabod, you weirdo, And as he rolled his great green eyes over the fat meadowlands, the rich fields of wheat, of rye, of buckwheat and Indian corn, and the orchards burdened with ruddy fruit which surrounded the warm tenement of Van Tassel, his heart yearned after the damsel who was to inherit these domains. Aha! And his imagination expanded with the idea how they might be readily turned into cash and the money invested in immense tracts of wild land and shingle palaces in the wilderness. Nay, his busy fancy already realized his hopes and presented to him the blooming Katrina, with the whole family of children mounted on top of a wagon loaded with household trumpery, with pots and kettles dangling beneath, and he beheld himself bestriding a pacing mare, a colt at her heels, setting out for Kentucky, Tennessee, or Lord knows where. I told you he had an overactive imagination. He sees the animals in their dinner plates already, and wow, Ichabod, wow. This story is nothing if not rich in descriptions. When he entered the house, the conquest of his heart was complete. It was one of those spacious farmhouses with high-ridged but lowly sloping roofs, built in the style handed down from the first Dutch settlers. The low projecting eaves forming a piazza along the front, capable of being closed up in bad weather. Under this were hung flails, harness, various utensils of husbandry, and nets for fishing in the neighboring river. Benches were built along the sides for summer use, and a great spinning wheel at one end, and a churn at the other showed the various uses to which this important porch might be devoted. From this piazza, the wondering Ichabod entered the hall, which formed the center of the mansion, and the place of usual residence. Here rows of resplendent pewter arranged on a long dresser dazzled his eyes. In one corner stood a huge bag of wool ready to be spun. In another, a quantity of linsey woolseed just from the loom. Ears of Indian corn and strings of dried apples and peaches hung in gay festoons along the wall, mingled with the gall of red peppers, and a door left ajar gave him a peep into the best parlor, where the claw-footed chairs and dark mahogany tables shone like mirrors, and irons with their accompanying shovels and tongs glistened from their covert of asparagus tops. Mock oranges and conch shells decorated the mantelpiece. Strings of various colored birds' eggs were suspended above it. A great ostrich egg was hung from the center of the room, and a corner cupboard, knowingly left open, displayed immense treasures of old silver and well-mended china. Hopefully soon we'll get into some actual story, dear friends and fiends. From the moment Ichabod lay his eyes upon these regions of delight, the peace of his mind was at an end, and his only study was how to gain the affections of the peerless daughter of Van Tassel. In this enterprise, however, he had more real difficulties than generally fell to the lot of a knight-errant of yore. Well, fancies himself quite up there, who seldom had anything but giants, enchanters, fiery dragons, and such like easily conquered adversaries to contend with, and had to make his way merely through gates of iron and brass, and walls of adamant to the castle keep where the lady of his heart was confined. All which he had achieved as easily as a man would carve his way to the center of a Christmas pie. And then the lady gave him her hand as a matter of course. Ichabod, on the contrary, had to win his way to the heart of a country coquette, beset with a labyrinth of whims and caprices which were forever presenting new difficulties and impediments. And he had to encounter a host of fearful adversaries of real flesh and blood, the numerous rustic admirers who beset every portal to her heart, keeping a watchful and angry eye upon each other, but ready to fly out in the common cause against any new competitor. Yeesh. Among these, the most formidable was a burly, roaring, roistering blade of the name of Abraham, or, according to the Dutch abbreviation, Brom van Brunt, the hero of the country round, which rang with his feats of strength and hardihood. He was broad-shouldered and double-jointed. Wow, cool. Selling point? With short, curly black hair and a buff but not unpleasant countenance, having a mingled air of fun and arrogance. From his Herculean frame and great powers of limb, he had received the nickname of Brom Bones. Brom Bones, dear friends and fiends, by which he was universally known. Oh yeah, good old Brom Bones, you know. He was famed for great knowledge and skill in horsemanship. He was foremost at all races and cockfights, and with the ascendancy which bodily strength always acquires in rustic life, was the umpire in all disputes, setting his hat on one side and giving his decisions with an air and tone that admitted of no gainsay or appeal. Interesting, I did not know that great strength gave you the deciding voice in matters, but here we are. He was always ready for a fight or a frolic, but had more mischief than ill will in his composition, and with all his overbearing roughness there was a strong dash of waggish good humor at bottom. He had 3 or 4 boon companions who regarded him as their model, and at the head of whom he scoured the country, attending every scene of feud or merriment for miles round. In cold weather he was distinguished by a fur cap surrounded with a flaunting fox's tail, and when the folks at a country gathering descried this well-known crest at a distance, whisking about among a squad of hard riders, they always stood by for a squall. Sometimes his crew would be heard dashing along past the farmhouses at midnight with a whoop and a hello, and the old dames, startled out of their sleep, would listen for a moment till the hurry-scurry had clattered by, and then exclaim, "Aye, there goes Brom Bones and his gang," giving him a free pass to cause chaos. Anyway, the neighbors looked upon him with a mixture of awe, admiration, and goodwill. He seems a lot like Gaston, and I don't particularly like him, but anyway, I guess that doesn't matter, right? And when any madcap prank or rustic brawl occurred in the vicinity, always shook their heads and warranted Brom Bones was at the bottom of it. Dang Brom Bones, darn you. This rantable hero had for some time singled out the blooming Katrina for the object of his uncouth gallantries. I'm sure he did, of course he did. And though his amorous toyings were something like the gentle caresses and endearments of a bear, yet it was whispered that she did not altogether discourage his hopes. I mean, he would be good for the farm, right? Certain it is, his advances were signals for rival candidates to retire, who felt no inclination to cross the lion in his amours. Insomuch that when his horse was seen tied to Van Tassel's paling on a Sunday night, a sure sign that his master was courting, or as it is termed, sparking. I didn't know it was termed that, but if ever I'm talking about courting now, I will use the word sparking. Within, all other suitors passed by in despair and carried the war into other quarters. Such was the formidable rival with whom Ichabod Crane had to contend, and, considering all things, a stouter man than he would have shrunk from the competition, and a wiser man would have despaired. He had, however, a happy mixture of pliability and perseverance in his nature. He was in form and spirit like a supple jack, yielding but tough. Though he bent, he never broke, and though he bowed beneath the slightest pressure, yet, the moment it was away, jerk, he was as erect and carried his head as high as ever. And as we know, dear listener, he is quite tall, so that is a very high head holding. To have taken the field openly against his rival would have been madness, for he was not a man to be thwarted in his amours any more than that stormy lover Achilles. Ichabod therefore made his advances in a quiet and gently insinuating manner, under cover of his character of singing master. He made frequent visits at the farmhouse. Not that he had anything to apprehend from the meddlesome interference of parents, which is so often a stumbling block in the path of lovers. Balt Van Tassel was an easy, indulgent soul. He loved his daughter better even than his pipe. I mean, I would hope so, because one's an inanimate object and the other is your daughter. Anyway, and like a reasonable man and an excellent father, let her have her way in everything. His notable little wife, too, had enough to do to attend to her housekeeping and manage her poultry, for, as she sagely observed, ducks and geese are foolish things and must be looked after, but girls can take care of themselves. Thus, while the busy dame bustled about the house or plied her spinning wheel at one end of the piazza, honest Balt would sit smoking his evening pipe at the other, watching the achievements of a little wooden warrior who, armed with sword in each hand, was most valiantly fighting the wind on a pinnacle of the barn. Oh, so when there's a suitor over, they just both go onto the porch, where the mother goes to tend to poultry, and they just look at a weather vane? Interesting. Like, nothing's going on in there, sure. In the meantime, Ichabod would carry on his suit with the daughter by the side of the spring under the great elm, or sauntering along in the twilight, that hour so favorable to the lover's eloquence. Also did not know that. I profess not to know how women's hearts are wooed and won. I feel like that's a bold admission, Washington Irving. To me, they have always been matters of riddle and admiration. Some seem to have but one vulnerable point or door of access, while others have 1,000 avenues, and may be captured in 1,000 different ways. Really, it's almost as if each woman is unique. It is a great triumph of skill to gain the former, but a still greater proof of generalship to maintain the possession of the latter. For man must battle for his fortress at every door and window. What are we reading? He who wins 1,000 common hearts is therefore entitled to some renown, but he who keeps undisputed sway over the heart of a coquette is indeed a hero. What is this that we are reading? Certain it is this was not the case with the redoubtable Brom Bones, and from the moment Ichabod Crane made his advances, the interest of the former evidently declined. His horse was no longer seen tied to the palings on Sunday nights, and a deadly feud gradually arose between him and the preceptor of Sleepy Hollow. Brom, who had a degree of rough chivalry in his nature, would fain have carried matters to open warfare and have settled their pretensions to the lady, according to the mode of those most concise and simple reasoners, the knights-errant of yore, by single combat. But Ichabod was too conscious of the superior might of his adversary to enter the list against him. He had overheard a boast of Bones that he would double the schoolmaster up and lay him on a shelf of his own schoolhouse, and he was too wary to give him an opportunity, understandably. There was something extremely provoking in this obstinately pacific system. It left Brom no alternative but to draw upon the funds of rustic waggery in his disposition, and to play off boorish practical jokes upon his rival. Ichabod became the object of whimsical persecution to Bones and his gang of Rough Riders. Bones and his Rough Riders, what a gang name. They harried his hitherto peaceful domains, smoked out his singing school by stomping the chimney, broke into his schoolhouse at night in spite of its formidable fastenings of withe and window stakes, and turned everything topsy-turvy so that the poor schoolmaster began to think all the witches in the country held their meetings there. Oh, that would get to old Ichabod though, wouldn't it? He's very, very into the supernatural. Oh, poor guy, I do kind of feel bad for him. But what was still more annoying, Brom took all opportunities of turning him into ridicule in presence of his mistress, and had a scoundrel dog whom he taught to whine in the most ludicrous manner, and introduced as the rival of Ichabod's to instruct her in psalmody. In this way, matters went on for some time without producing any material effect on the relative situations of the contending powers. On a fine autumnal afternoon, Ichabod, in pensive mood, sat enthroned on the lofty stool from whence he usually watched all the concerns of his little literary realm. In his hand he swayed a ferule, which is a ruler that he hit students with. That scepter of despotic power, the birch of justice reposed upon 3 nails behind the throne, a constant terror to evildoers. While on the desk before him might be seen sundry contraband articles and prohibited weapons, detected upon the persons of idle children, such as half-munched apples, pop-guns, whirligigs, fly-cages, and whole legions of rampant little paper gamecocks. I mean, heaven forbid you have a half-munched apple. Apparently, there had been some appalling act of justice recently inflicted, for his scholars were all busily intent upon their books, or slyly whispering behind them with one eye kept upon their master, and a kind of buzzing stillness reigned throughout the classroom. I can hear that stillness, you know? It was suddenly interrupted by the appearance of a man in a tow-cloth jacket and trousers, a round-crowned fragment of a hat like the cap of Mercury, and mounted on the back of a ragged, wild, half-broken colt, which he managed with a rope by way of halter. He came clambering up to the school door with an invitation to Ichabod to attend the merrymaking or quilting frolic to be held that evening at Minor Van Tassel's. All was now bustle and hubbub in the quiet schoolroom. The scholars were hurried through their lessons without stopping at trifles. Those who were nimble skipped over half with impunity, and those who were tardy had the smart application now and in their rear to quicken their speed to help them over a tall word. Books were flung aside without being put away on the shelves, inkstands were overturned, benches thrown down, and the whole school was turned loose an hour before the usual time, bursting forth like a legion of young imps, yelping and racketing about the green in joy at their early emancipation. So Ichabod let them out early. I don't think they're attending the quilting event. The gallant Ichabod now spent at least an extra hour at his toilet, brushing and furbishing up his best and indeed only suit of rusty black, and arranging his locks by a bit of broken looking-glass that hung up in the schoolhouse. That he might make his appearance before his mistress in the true style of a cavalier, he borrowed a horse from the farmer with whom he was domiciliated, a choleric old Dutchman of the name Hans van Ripper, and, thus gallantly mounted, he issued forth like a knight-errant in a quest of adventures. But it is meet I should, in the true spirit of a romantic story, which I didn't know this was a romantic story, give some account of the looks and equipments of my hero and his steed. I thought we already did that. The animal he bestrode was a broken-down plough horse, and that he had outlived almost everything but its viciousness. He was gaunt and shagged, with an ewe neck and a head like a hammer. His rusty mane and tail were tangled and knotted with burrs. One eye had lost its pupil and was glaring and spectral, but the other had the gleam of a genuine devil in it. Interesting. Still, he must have had fire and metal in his day, if we may judge from the name he bore of Gunpowder. He had in fact been a favorite steed of his master's, the choleric Van Ripper, who was a furious rider, and had infused, very probably, some of his own spirit into the animal. For, old and broken down as he looked, there was more of the lurking devil in him than in any young filly in the country. Ichabod was a suitable figure for such a steed. He rode with short stirrups which brought his knees nearly to the pommel of the saddle. His sharp elbows stuck out like grasshoppers. He carried his whip perpendicularly in his hands like a scepter. And his horse jogged on. The motion of his arms was not unlike the flapping of a pair of wings. A small wool hat rested on the top of his nose, for so his scanty strip of a forehead might be called, and the skirts of his black coat fluttered out almost to the horse's tail. Oh, such was the appearance of Ichabod and his steed as they shambled out of the gates of Hans van Ripper, and it was altogether such an apparition that is seldom to be met with in broad daylight. It was, as I have said, a fine autumnal day. The sky was clear and serene, and nature wore that rich and golden livery which we always associate with the idea of abundance. The forests had put on their sober brown and yellow, while some trees of the tenderer kind had been nipped by the frost into brilliant dyes of orange, purple, and scarlet. Streaming files of wild ducks began their appearance high in the air. The bark of the squirrel might be heard from the groves of beech and hickory nuts, and the pensive whistle of the quail at intervals from the neighboring stubble field. The small birds were taking their farewell banquets. In the fullness of their revelry, they fluttered, chirping and frolicking from bush to bush and tree to tree, capricious from the very profusion and variety around them. There was the honest cock robin, the favorite game of stripling sportsmen, with its loud, querulous notes, and the twittering blackbirds flying in sable clouds, and the golden-winged woodpecker with his crimson crest, his broad black gorget and splendid plumage, and the cedar bird with its red-tipped wings and yellow-tipped tail, and its little Monterco cap of feathers, and the blue jay, that noisy coxcomb, in his gay light blue coat and white underclothes, screaming and chattering, nodding and bobbing and bowing, and pretending to be on good terms with every songster of the grove. My dear friends and fiends, if you didn't know birds, well, you know them now, am I right? As Ichabod jogged slowly on his way, his eye ever open to every symptom of culinary abundance. Oh, good Lord. He is thinking he wants to eat all the birds. Ranged with delight over the treasures of jolly autumn. On all sides he beheld vast store of apples, some hanging in the oppressive opulence on the trees, some gathered into baskets and barrels for the market, others heaped up in rich piles for the cider press. Farther on he beheld great fields of corn with its golden ears peeping from their leafy coverts, and holding out the promise of cakes and hasty pudding, and the yellow pumpkins lying beneath them, turning up their fair round bellies to the sun, and giving ample prospects of the most luxurious of pies. If you're hungry, this is probably not the story to be listening to, I didn't realize. And as he beheld them, soft anticipation stole over his mind of dainty slapjacks, well buttered and garnished with honey or treacle by the delicate little dimpled hand of Katrina Van Tassel. I do have to enjoy how he's fantasizing about pancakes or similar made from pumpkins, but really, oh, her little hand pouring syrup over them, be still my heart. It's quite funny, actually. Thus feeding his mind and my hunger with many sweet thoughts and sugared suppositions, he journeyed along the sides of a range of hills which look out upon some of the goodliest scenes of the mighty Hudson. The sun gradually wheeled its broad disk down in the west. The wide bosom of the Tappan Zee lay motionless and glassy, excepting that here and there a gentle undulation waved and prolonged the blue shadow of the distant mountain. A few amber coals floated in the sky, without a breath of air to move them. The horizon was of a fine golden tint, gradually changing into a pure apple green, and from that into the deep blue of the mid-heaven. A slanting ray lingered on the woody crest of the precipices that overhung some parts of the river, giving greater depth to the dark gray and purple of their rocky sides. A sloop was loitering in the distance, dropping slowly down with the tide, her sail hanging uselessly against the mast. And as the reflection of the sky gleamed along the still water, it seemed as if the vessel was suspended in the air. And on that suspense, full note, my dear friends and fiends, that will end tonight's part of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. I don't think much happened in the way of actual plot. Ichabod did receive an invitation to his beloved's home in the evening, but we did get a lot of descriptions of autumn. So if you are currently experiencing autumn, maybe this made you appreciate it more. And if you miss autumn and spooky season, like I do all year round when it's not spooky season, I hope this helped you get your fix a little bit. And I don't know, it made me hungry too, all those foods. But on that note, I will see you shortly in the next installment of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, where I do believe so much more happens, but we had to get there in style and describe the rivalry that was going on, don't you know? Anyway, stick around and enjoy another video, or head on to sleep. Now, off to sleep and dream what you will, or stay a while and enjoy another tale. Whichever you choose, I'll speak to you again, and until then, stay spooky, my friend. Good night.